Hi, and thanks for joining me here for another episode of Story Time. Today's story is called Watching for Billy. It comes from my collection, Traveling Left of Center and Other Stories. Um, it's an odd little story, like so many of mine are, about the impact loneliness can have on your decision making, I guess it would be. So here's the opening to Watching for Billy. The chime of the security alarm woke Agnes from her usual afternoon nap. One of the curses of old age was the need to nap at odd hours of the day, coupled with the inability to stay asleep at night. And since Roger died, it was even worse. Agnes found herself nodding off at mid-morning while watching the game shows, during the afternoon court dramas, after her soup and sandwich dinner that was her evening meal. But why not? There was no one to talk to and nothing else to do. Her son Brad said that she wouldn't be bored if she would move into a retirement home. But she didn't want to leave her house and live with strangers, even if the loneliness was sometimes more than she could bear. "I've lived here for more than 60 years and I'm not leaving now," she had told him. "There's nothing you can say that will change my mind." "Fine," he answered with the familiar note of irritation in his voice. "But if you won't move, you need to at least have an alarm installed. There have been too many break-ins in your neighborhood lately." Agnes reluctantly agreed. She supposed her son meant well, although she wondered if it wasn't more for his own peace of mind than her safety. It wasn't worth arguing about, though. And he was right about the old neighborhood. It had slowly deteriorated as longtime friends and neighbors died or moved to the suburbs. Their once pristine houses chopped up into cheap apartments that drew the worst elements, like maggots to rotting meat. So she let Brad have his way, and she was dutifully attentive when the technician explained how the alarm worked and what each noise and light represented. "You'll hear it chime if a door or window is opened, even if the alarm isn't on," he had told her. "But if the alarm is set, the siren will sound. And here," he pointed to the part of the panel where tiny lights glowed. "These lights will show you where the problem is. Green for closed and red for open." During the long summer days, she didn't bother to activate the system until bedtime, trusting the safety of daylight to keep thieves and robbers away from her door. But as winter drew near, she found herself turning on the alarm at the first sign of dusk, feeling for the first time a little unsure, a little vulnerable, in the house where she had lived for 6 decades. So, as I said, it is from my collection, Traveling Left of Center and Other Stories. As for where the idea for the book came from, or from the story came from, you'd have to obviously read the entire story to get the message. But Watching for Billy, I'll tell you briefly, no spoilers, is what happens when a runaway, or he said he was a runaway, enters her home unexpectedly, unannounced. And she finds that having another person in the house, another heart beating, another person to talk to, was far more welcome than the idea that perhaps she was exposing herself to an issue that could be potentially dangerous. Made me think about elderly people, about living alone, about what happens even when you think you have adjusted to it, when suddenly there isn't anybody else there to talk to, when you spend your days walking through an empty house, you spend your nights sleeping in an empty bed. What do you do then? How far are you willing to go to have that sense of loneliness be satisfied? Will you put yourself at risk? Because anything, or anybody for that case, like Billy in the story, is better than getting up in the morning with no one to make breakfast for, going to bed at night with no one to say goodnight to. It is, sadly, a far too often situation for many people. And I don't just mean elderly, although in this particular instance, the woman is elderly. But many people end up living alone for one reason or another. The kids have gone off to school, and then they've gone off and gotten married, or maybe you never had children. Your spouse left you, death, divorce, or maybe you were never married. In any case, as the days go on, as the months go by, as the years move on, and you're no longer quite as busy with your career, you suddenly realize, what am I going to do? How am I going to fill the days? Many people begin volunteering. Many people form new friendships. But then there are people who are just, I think of them as drifting. They're not sure what to do. They just know that they are lonely, that they wish there was someone there. And in this particular case, Agnes makes a choice. And I will leave it to you to read the story and decide whether it was a safe choice, a wise choice, and what is she going to happen, or what is she going to do when the story is over? How is she going to deal with the next stage? Anyways, that is an excerpt from my story, Watching for Billy. I hope you were sufficiently intrigued by it to want to read the entire story, and perhaps even want to read all the stories that are in Traveling Left of Center. I look forward to sharing another story with you next week, and that is it for today's story time. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.